The Doge program was an exercise in Silicon Valley hubris. It was, by all measures, an abject failure. It's going to cost people far more than it saved, and all it did was breach Americans' trust in the institutions. Once we get more humanoid robots, that's when you'll see the cost of ordinary goods and services like your water bottle is going to start to come down, because basically from extraction of petroleum to the manufacturing of plastic products to the delivery to your door, a human will never have touched it, in a couple of years. That'll lower the cost probably by about a third or 2/3. Within 5 to 7 years, we're going to see China have very clearly eclipsed and start to really kind of sink again. Even if China hypothetically achieves AGI or ASI before us, which probably will not happen, they have literally a tenth of the data centers that we do. And they have no hyperscale, or they have like one hyperscaler, whereas most of the hyperscalers in the world are American. So in terms of expertise, as far as I'm concerned, China has already lost the AI war.
Welcome to the Mindblowers podcast. This is part 2 of my conversation with AI expert David Shapiro. In this episode, we continue our deep dive into post-labor economics. What happens to jobs, income, and the entire social contract when automation replaces most human labor? How do we rebuild society around that? But we're not stopping there. We'll also explore the AI race between the US and China, where David shares some bold and possibly controversial views that may challenge your assumptions. First, though, we pick up right where we left off, talking about how society might need to recalibrate in the face of massive automation. Let's get into it. How about incentivizing people to start businesses, especially if you defined knowledge jobs that would be in immediate danger? I mean, I guess we could sit down and write a list of maybe 10 million people who would be in immediate danger the next 5 years. So I guess they could do two things, right? They could try to upskill themselves to put them a little bit out of danger, or you could incentivize them to start a company that could add to the economy and maybe add new jobs.
Right.
Do you think that could work?
I mean, certainly here in America, the barrier of starting a business is very, very low. So in terms of incentivizing it, I think that would be possible. You're going to have to take it on a case-by-case basis, looking at at the city, county, or state level as to what makes the most sense. And this is another reason why post-labor economics really emphasizes economic subsidiarity, is because you're going to know what the opportunities are in your local economy better than even a state auditor or the federal government is going to know. So just as an example, is something that has become more popular in Europe is what's called solar grazing, and that is where you combine solar farms, and instead of maintaining the land with lawnmowers, you maintain the land with sheep and goats. And so then you end up with this double use of the land, where say like, let's just use an example, like let's say I'm a farmer and you own a solar field, and so the business is you own a solar farm that generates $1 million of electricity a year, and I have a bunch of goats, right? And I need to feed the goats. Well, instead of exchanging money, right, I just say, hey, like, Dan, like, can I bring my goats over and we'll clear out the field once a year, or a couple times a year, and so my goats get fed, you get your land maintained, and then the goats translate that brush into goat milk, right? So that's an example of like what we could incentivize. But the thing is a lot of those things are there's a lot of regulatory hurdles. There's a lot of red tape. And so a big part is actually empowering and enablement, not necessarily incentivizing it. It's more like getting problems out of the way and having a menu of saying, hey, here's all the different ways that you can integrate, a solar farm with the local economy, or a data center with the local economy, or who owns the robots, right? If you have robots, that creates a new set of jobs of maintaining robots, right? Rather than shipping a robot back to the factory, what if you have a right to repair and local repair tech guys, right, that love fixing things, right? If there was a bunch of robots, that might be my new job, right? Is saying, hey, bring me your robot, I'll fix it, or I'll come to your house and fix your robot. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities out there. And what we're looking for with post-labor economics is not big overhauls, but those smaller, high leverage interventions that give us outsized impact of just saying, hey, what if we look at some of the more nuanced ways of enabling some of this productivity and local investment and that local reinvestment? And that's really where you get the win-win opportunities.
So obviously, a lot of this has to come from the government, and well, you do have a new administration in the U.S. With Trump, but also behind him, it's kind of a different breed of politicians, much more, I would say, tech oriented, startup oriented. Are you seeing some kind of understanding of all this? I mean, also Musk has been part of the administration. Do you think he has convinced Trump to look at more into the future and think in new ways? Because Trump is still saying things like, "I want to guarantee that AI doesn't take away jobs," which does
Right.
sound a bit old-fashioned to me.
Well, yeah. So I'm talking to people who advise the state on that very thing, and the thing is number one, the government talks to old school economists who just say protect jobs, jobs are the way of the future, so on and so forth. Reality will catch up with them eventually. So, and in the meantime, particularly at the national level, take whatever they say with a grain of salt, because behind closed doors, they know that AI and robots are coming for jobs. There is no chance that Sam Altman and Elon Musk, who have both spoken directly to the administration, haven't said, by the way, this could destroy millions of jobs, and that's the goal, right? And the upside is plenty new stock options and so on and so forth. So everything that you hear from the administration is going to be filtered through PR coaching, right? It's all about optics still. Eventually, when we get to the point where unemployment gets high and stays high, then the conversation will change. Where it's like, okay, now we need a new paradigm. But most people say, I'll believe it when I see it. And so this is why the work of people that are not bound by public optics, like you and me, where we can start socializing these ideas and start working on the frameworks so that it will be ready and fully baked when it is necessary. And looking at the clock, it looks like we've got 3 to 5 years before it's really going to the temperature is going to go up, and 5 to 7 years before it's going to be, people are getting their pitchforks if we haven't had some major renovations to our economic paradigms. So yeah, take it with a grain of salt, because no politician is going to say, the goal is to destroy jobs, right? That's how you lose your next election. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that is particularly true with Trump, right? He has said so many things where, like, he has said that he would put military on Greenland to take it away from Denmark, for example.
Yeah, take it with a grain of salt.
Exactly, right? And that's what I'm telling people, that, it's not a bunch of lunatics. He might say something quite radical, but and may not mean it, right? And I think you're spot on, because if any politician says, yes, it's likely that, most of you will lose your job within 5-6 years, then you get a panic, and we say, we don't
Right.
like that guy. We like the other guy who says we'll keep it. And
We'll keep it all the same, yeah.
I'll ensure that things will be fine. On the other hand, I mean, it seems like, for example, the Doge program, I mean, it's still a little bit fuzzy to me exactly what's going on there. But there was some talk that they also had AI people within that program, and they were looking at effectivizing the federal government quite a lot. Do you see that happening?
No, the Doge program was an exercise in Silicon Valley hubris. It was by all measures an abject failure. It's going to cost people far more than it saved, and all it did was breach Americans' trust in the institutions, sorts of things. The UK government actually last year launched a commission on like, hey, let's see if we can figure out how to use artificial intelligence to optimize the government. And I'll be an outside advisor for a summer project here in the state of North Carolina that will be advising the governor's office about using artificial intelligence. What are the best practices? What's the messaging to Congress and those sorts of things. So behind the scenes, there are far more mature conversations happening than Elon Musk and Doge, who is mostly just a showman at this point, at least where politics is concerned.
Yeah, so basically, you think a lot more is going on than people actually see and hear.
Most of it is not discussed publicly yet. No.
Yeah. Oh, and I think that does make a lot of sense because, I mean, no politician will gain from kind of starting a panic. But do
Yep.
you also see the choice of people surrounded? I mean, not just in the government, but also some of the people who are listened to, like, for example, Palmer Luckey. I don't know if you know him, but so he's the guy kind of delivering a lot of the weapon tech to the government. And it's quite interesting what he was saying. He was basically saying that, if China attacks Taiwan, the difference between the US being able to respond effectively or just be pretty much just a sitting duck is AI. And because the response time of AI and hyper intelligent weapons,
Right.
will be what is needed. And and I also would just think like connecting Musk to the government, even if Doge has been a failure, then it's probably a signal that you are quite interested in the development and tech and robots.
Right. Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is every Silicon Valley, venture capitalist or founder believes that their technology is going to save the world, and that they alone can fix the problem. You know, the U.S. military, for all of its inefficiencies, they know their business better than Silicon Valley, and it is categorically not just down to having a super fast super intelligence. Its military campaigns are about defense in depth, so layering strategic assets, the ability to reach and project power, and the ability to project power is basically the ability to project energy. This is what Russia's war on Ukraine has proven, which is that at the fundamental level, it still comes down to armor, artillery, and troops, or armor, artillery, and ammunition. Right? Can you put weapons fire downrange? Can you put it on target? And America is still unmatched in terms of air dominance and deep sea naval operations. So whether or not China tries to invade Taiwan, that's as far as they get. They don't get any further than Taiwan, and it's not just America would ensure that. It's South Korea, it's Japan, it's Australia, it's the Philippines, it's India, which if you've for anyone in the audience, India and Pakistan are presently trading blows, and China is using this as an opportunity to escalate their rhetoric against India. Now, that's not to underplay and say that AI will be a differentiating factor, but just to say that it's down to AI alone, that's not really how it works. Honestly, if you want to look at differentiating technologies, drone warfare seems like it's the next big thing. Honestly, Ukraine has been able to punch way above its weight by sinking most of the Russian Black Sea fleet with drones, right, with remote control boats, and those sorts of things. And 70% of the casualties inflicted on Russia right now, including infantry and heavy armor, are drones. So drone-based warfare, to be fair, Anduril does deliver drones, and AI is a part of that. But AI is an enabling technology. It's not the weapon, if that makes sense.
Yeah, true. I mean, I don't think he's saying AI will do it alone. I think what he's saying is, updating the software till the best possible software empowered with AI will be the thing. He's not saying you don't need the physical assets like the drones, for example,
Right.
to achieve that. It was more if you could actually kind of feel this shift in the government and maybe also among kind of top leaders in the US of taking AI and robotics more seriously than previous governments and
Yeah.
leaders.
DARPA has taken it seriously for a long time. I mean, DARPA has been funding autonomous vehicle research since at least the 90s. So to me, it's nothing new. And I often forget that people have not been into robotics and AI as long as I have. But like I was there when the first SLAM, so SLAM is acronym for simultaneous localization and mapping. That's the technology that all Teslas rely on. So if you ever see like the view that a Tesla sees, where it's like mapping everything that it sees around it, that's SLAM technology. And I was with my friends at NC State when the first SLAM systems came out, like 2010, 2000. Yeah, I think it was around 2010, 2009. So those technologies are nothing new. DARPA has been one of the biggest investors in some of those technologies for a long time. So really what you're seeing is the maturation of these technologies and these interests. So you've got, robot dogs and autonomous battle tanks and autonomous drones, and the Air Force with the semi-autonomous F-16 fighters that they're trialing. All of this is just the maturation. And so once it becomes visible, then it becomes a PR campaign. It becomes propaganda. So I think probably what you're seeing and responding to is escalating propaganda between America and China. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not interesting, right? It's certainly very interesting, and taking humans out of the line of fire, I think, is good for everyone. Because whether it's an AI-based wingman, whether it's a drone-to-drone warfare, certainly some of the worst things that you see coming out of Ukraine is like Russians trying to surrender, but the drone blows them up anyways, right? Like that's pretty inhumane, but at the same time, like it's just a natural evolution of warfare. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, it will force more conversations about how do we want to conduct ourselves on the global stage. And I don't just mean America; I mean we as humans. I think that's really what it's going to force.
So returning to the economic forces, we still talk about fears of inflation, even though kind of inflation has come down. And I mean, in general, technology is deflationary. I mean, it makes prices fall. But
Yep.
but we haven't really seen it like to an extent where the average inflation drops to a level where you can like significantly lower interest rates, for example.
Right.
When do you expect to see that? If you're expecting to see it.
Well, so remember, the primary thing that AI buys us is cognitive hyperabundance, and cognition is not the primary bottleneck for most goods and services that you consume. When you hear my water bottle here, right? Like it cost me $16 on Amazon. How much IQ did it take to deliver that? Not much, right? So AI is not really gonna solve that problem. It's not gonna bring down the price that much. At least not directly. Now, indirectly, you might say, okay, well, it's a petroleum-based product. So if we can switch to a more solar-based economy, then we have more petroleum that can be used for plastics instead of fuel, those sorts of things. But when you look at like where has AI actually dramatically lowered costs, it's lowered the cost of law, right? It's lowered the cost of image generation, of music generation, and those sorts of things. So it's not universal. It's not a flat effect across the economy where you get deflation. What it has really driven down the cost of is digital products. So what we're probably going to see is many more Hollywood movies and many more books and those sorts of things. The amount of cognitive labor that goes into writing a good book, you're talking 3 to 5 years of like regular work on something. The amount of cognitive labor that goes into making a blockbuster movie, that goes into making good artwork and good music, excuse me, all of those things are the kinds of things that are being made much cheaper. And we're not talking like they're 10% cheaper. We're talking they're 20,000% cheaper. So that's where you're really seeing the deflation. Now, once AI gets a little bit better and gets a little bit more saturated, you're going to see more knock-on effects of, the cost of law services will hopefully go down. Once we get more humanoid robots, that's when you'll see the cost of ordinary goods and services like your water bottle is going to start to come down, because basically from extraction of petroleum to the manufacturing of plastic products to the delivery to your door, a human will never have touched it, in a couple of years. That'll lower the cost probably by about a third or two-thirds, thing to see. Now, if AI helps us invent nuclear fusion, then everything changes again, because then the cost of heavy materials basically goes to not zero, but it goes down pretty dramatically. Because then you can make however much concrete that you want. You can move trees however far you want, or you can whatever. You can use laser metal sintering to make your home if you want, if you have nuclear fusion, just because energy becomes so cheap at that.
I actually talked to the CEO of a fusion company in Germany. She said that fusion would make energy abundant and clean, but she didn't believe free or close to free. So I don't know if that is because she wants to sell it at a premium. But at least because I asked her, will it be almost free and abundant and clean? And she said, well, not free. Right. But of course it will be a game changer. Because I was just thinking back to your friend, right, who invested in these houses, and thinking, like, is that a dangerous strategy, at least in the long term, right? Because if you say, okay, so the land they were on, let's say that's nothing unique, so that will not increase. And let's say in, 5 to 10 years, we'll see like 3 printers building a house almost without the labor cost, right? So some investments could actually turn out to be relatively dangerous if we look at the progress of economy in that way. And there could probably be other things that you could invest in. I mean, even like different commodities. Let's say if people invest in, coffee or chocolate or stuff that, just like diamonds, right? You can make them artificially today. So how do you see that? Do you see AI and robotics going in across a broad spectrum, really lowering costs of living?
Yeah, in the long run. I mean, you look at the fact that 200 years ago, 30 to 40% or more of your income went to food alone, and now it's 10 to 20%, right? And food is something that everybody needs. The size of cars has gotten bigger over time, right? Like the length of time. I think it was about the 1950s when the average American home had one car, right? And now it's average home has 2 cars, maybe 1 car for every adult, adult children as well. Houses have gotten bigger over time. Cars have gotten bigger. Televisions have gotten dramatically cheaper, right? Domestic appliances have basically gone down in price. So yes, in the long run, technological advancements generally decrease the price of many goods and services. The amount of internet bandwidth we get today would have cost billions of dollars, and would not have even been possible before the 90s. Even if you were the military, right? They still had ISDN for emergency military communications until then. So yes, in the long run, you're going to see many knock-on effects and many compounding returns from these. Particularly, to bring it back to post-labor economics, if you can shorten the supply lines of things with circular economies by incentivizing that local investment, the cost of fuel to send pears from South America to be packed in Thailand and then shipped back across the Pacific, to me, that's insane. I don't get it. Like, I mean, I get it if you put it on paper, just because the cost of labor, but if you destroy the value of labor arbitrage, then you're you're also saving on fuel, right? So there's what we're looking for in the long run is not necessarily the direct unit cost, because it's like, will a robot make this better? No, we already have purpose-built machines to build a water bottle, but you're looking at everything else. You're looking at the last mile delivery. You're looking at all the inputs that go into it and knock-on effects and spillover effects. Yeah, so we will see some decreases in cost of living, relatively speaking, particularly as AI increases crop yields. I don't know if you've seen there's like drones that go zap weeds now. It's pretty cool with lasers. It's like that seems like a pretty Star Trek level technology. Like we have weed fighting drones, and rather than spraying chemicals on stuff, it just zaps it with a beam of energy, and so you have functionally infinite use of that. So yeah, in the long run, certainly the cost of living will go down, relatively speaking. Inflation might still raise the nominal dollars, but in terms of percentage of your income that goes towards housing and food and basic goods and services will probably go down, which means that you have more money for other things. At the same time, we also have to consider that maybe your income also goes down due to until society finds a new equilibrium. Which goes back to the point of the transition could be rocky for some people.
Yeah, because I think it's kind of a double-edged thought here, because people are saying, okay, so income might almost disappear. Let's say you can't pivot, so you take a low-paying job from a high-paying job. You get some small level of UBI or something similar, and
Right.
you have a little bit of capital where you get some dividend from it. But if the demand side goes down, then obviously you would say inflation would turn to deflation, correct? Because there would be too much supply.
Yeah, well, so it depends on how you define inflation and deflation. So it's like, is inflation just the supply of capital, of money goes up? Because it all, the price of things is about goods and services. So when most people say inflation, they're talking about the price of goods and services. And if you have insufficient supply or inelastic supply and the demand goes up, then the price goes up. So it, in my purest view, that's not always inflation. That's just supply and demand. But if you mean inflation at like the national level, which is, the Fed is constantly injecting more money into the economy so that you're incentivized to spend money now. Yes, I would argue that we could get to a point where consumer confidence is so low, particularly if we're hovering at like 12% unemployment, where people just stop spending money. And we saw this happen during the pandemic where people said, this is a crisis. I'm not going to spend any money until I know what's going on. And so that's one of the reasons that they did the stimulus checks.
I think we could see that. One thing I'm wondering about is, for example, talking about drone delivery. So I think I've heard about drone delivery since 2015 or 16 or something like that. People saying, yeah, I live in London and now you can get Amazon drone delivery. I tried to find out how much these things are actually scaling. So like drone delivery, autonomous taxis. I mean, you hear about it and you see videos with it, but
Yep.
even in China, it doesn't. Yeah, I think drone delivery has now scaled in China, but it's still like only 1 out of 10 taxis would be autonomous, for example. Do you
Right.
see these things scaling soon in the US?
In the U.S., no, we're too regulation heavy. There's all kinds of concerns. We're becoming more like Europe and England, where we're getting better at saying no. There's a lot of what we call NIMBYism in America, not in my backyard, where people, particularly with AI and automation, when people see some of these new things, they're just like, I don't like it, make it go away, right? So there's a lot of resistance to those kinds of things. Now, will we get to a point where it becomes inevitable? Sure, right? There's going to be a point where there's enough public consensus that this is the way that things need to be done. You just need to get over it. But here in America, we are very, very reactionary and we're very resistant to change, ironically enough, even though we're also one of the innovation leaders. It's kind of the double-edged sword, right? If If you're an innovation leader, you have the luxury of also being grumpy about innovation.
But do you see, like, for example, in Las Vegas, in San Francisco, I think they have now implemented these Waymos. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, I can of course see the numbers, but I mean, does it feel like when you are actually in these cities that it's an option taking these driverless cars, or are there way too few?
Well, I avoid those cities as much as possible, so for me, it's not an option. um, and certainly where I live in rural North Carolina, it's definitely not an option. I've seen exactly one Cybertruck, and I only saw it once. Now, that to be fair, some people have Teslas, and Teslas they've mostly solved self-driving. You can get most places that you need without much intervention. And I have plenty of friends telling me like, it's interesting, even amongst Tesla drivers, many Tesla drivers like, oh, it's perfectly solved, and some Tesla drivers are like, it's super not solved. So sometimes it comes down to just personal opinion and what they expect. But even Teslas and Waymos already are safer per rider mile than human drivers. Even with that, the mistakes that they make are very uncanny. So there was a case. I don't want to libel a company. I don't remember which company it was, but it was a driverless vehicle ran over a woman and dragged her for 50 yards because it didn't realize that it had run over someone. And it's possible for a human driver to make that same mistake, but it doesn't feel right when it's a machine that makes that mistake.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I think maybe that way of thinking is holding us back a little bit. A related example was a teenager who committed suicide because of an AI companion.
Yep.
That was kind of his girlfriend, and so I said, okay, I mean that's tragic. Of course, we should try and protect ourselves from that, right? Should we regulate? Should we stop it? And then I researched how many people commit suicide because of romantic relationships in the US per year, and it's about 8,000 per year. So
Wow.
I'm like, okay, one autonomous vehicle killed this person or she was injured, and one AI companion resulted in a suicide. But if humans result in fatal accidents, I don't know how many you have in the US a year from cars, but it's
It's a
probably
lot.
in the
Yeah.
10,000s, right?
Oh, I think it's at least 250,000 a year fatal accidents in America.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's a shame if we hold back development just because people think it's 1,000 times worse when something autonomous or AI driven kills a person than when another human does it.
Yeah. And I was wrong. It is about 30 to 40,000 fatalities. I was probably thinking 250,000 accidents per year. Anyways, but yeah, so one thing that's interesting is, and this is true for all technologies, is when you have those spectacular failure modes, people often overly focus on them, whereas what you don't see is the net effect of like, well, how many accidents were avoided, right? Because you can't look at like a data point that doesn't exist, right? So if the proliferation of AIs, and here's just an example, as AI proliferates, as more and more people have chatbots and AI companions and whatever else, if we see the aggregate suicide rate go down, and if you can correlate it with the use of AI, you say people that use AI are 52% less likely to kill themselves. Then you say, well, yes, on occasion someone might say like, my AI girlfriend broke up with me, so I killed myself, which would be tragic, like you said. But at the same time, you have to take a step back and say, what is the net effect of this technology? And more often than not, the net effect of a technology is better than the alternative, which is why we use them. So an example of this is people are concerned about the water use that data centers have. They say like AI uses, X amount of water. It's like, well, so do almonds, but you still eat almonds, right? I think it's something like 2,000 liters of water per kilogram of cheese or something like that. It's like it's an absurd amount of water goes into cheese, an absurd amount of water goes into almonds. So it's like, well, if ChatGPT uses half a gallon of water per chat, but that saves you more time, energy, and money than it would have cost to hire a human to do it. maybe the net effect is you're actually using less water than you would have from having to hire a human or drive to the store or whatever else. I think I don't remember if it was last time we talked or someone else that I talked to, but it's like why is it cheaper for Amazon to bring me my groceries than for me to do it myself? And it's because you have one grocery driver for everyone in the neighborhood, right? So it's like sometimes it's just, if we just need a couple things, it's like just order it on Amazon and we'll wait a day or two and it shows up and it saves us time because it saves us an hour of going to the store. And then it also saves us money because instead of me using my one car to go get groceries, it's an Amazon van or an Amazon delivery truck that brings everyone's stuff all at once. So it's much more efficient that way. So then even though Amazon seems evil at sometimes, there's a reason it's the cheapest option to do some things, is because they found a better, more efficient way of doing things.
I'm wondering now that it's very clear that the US sees China as the main adversary. I'm wondering if they will speed up the development in terms of AI and robotics, because the thing about China is, since it's not democratic, is that they just decide to focus on stuff. And it might not make financial sense in the short term. But if they say, we want electric cars and we want all of them to be autonomous within 5 years, they will just make it happen. And
Yep.
if people say we don't like the drones or we don't like autonomous cars, they're like, it's not going to matter. They will kind of just remove these people, keep them quiet at best.
Yep.
And I'm kind of sensing what J.D. Vance at least said to Europe is, or the EU, like, stop being silly, stop with your regulations that kind of delay progress. So I'm wondering if kind of Europe and the US will be forced to not be so cautious and move ahead at a higher speed.
So there's a great book that addresses this. It's called Why Nations Fail, and I recommend everyone read it. Authoritarian regimes like China today and like the Soviet Union in the 40s, 50s, up through the 90s, when you have a command economy like that, where someone from on high says, "Go build, do this thing," you can set an objective and you can coordinate a tremendous amount of resources and labor and everything to make these things happen. And they have spectacular successes over the short term. However, when you consider that Russia now has the same GDP as Texas, it has been far surpassed by the American experiment, even though they were the first to space, right? They had the first satellite, they had so many firsts, they had the first dog in space, and so many other things. One of the advantages, one of the long-term advantages of flexible democratic societies, so that includes America, all of Europe, all of the UK, is that we restructure and reinvent ourselves. So that's the process of creative destruction. That was a term coined by Mises, the economist, more than a century ago now, or I think about a century ago. So creative destruction is the process by which we allow a certain level of chaos in our societies. Now, granted, Europe in particular has tamped down on that. America is trying to tamp down on it, although we Americans are much more comfortable with chaos than many Western nations, and it shows because we're very loud. I am aware of how loud we are on the world stage. But India is another example of a country that is comfortable with chaos because there are so many cultures and subcultures and languages and those sorts of things. So the more comfortable a nation is with chaos, the more they are able to really fundamentally adapt to innovation at a base level. Now, China, with their very, very long history of Taoism and Confucianism and the Great Leap Forward and everything, their biggest fear is chaos. It's called Luan. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but one of the primary things that the CCP and Xi Jinping in particular is terrified of is chaos. And so the Chinese instinct is to tamp down on any chaos whatsoever, but that acts like a pressure cooker until it blows up. So yes, China is doing amazing things right now, but they do not allow creative destruction and they do not tolerate any chaos until it erupts. So basically what I'm kind of expecting is that within 5 to 7 years, we're going to see China have very clearly eclipsed and start to really kind of sink again. China has a few geographic and other demographic differences that will keep it more relevant than Russia, because Russia's economy is based almost entirely on petroleum exports. China does not have that benefit, but they do have a huge population, and they have several other differences from Russia. But at the same time, because as a culture and as a political culture, because they are so resistant to chaos and creative destruction, they're not going to keep up in the long run. America and Europe and England and the rest of the developed world and developing world are just far more comfortable with chaos and change, and that's ultimately going to be our superpower in the long run.
I think it will be very interesting to see because there are really different opinions on this matter. Like I follow Peter Seihan. I
Hmm.
don't know if you see him, and he's very aligned with your view that they are already declining. He's saying. On the other hand, the people I know that travel to China quite often and do a lot of business with China and follow like industry reports are saying, well, it's already all over. China is leading in, I think it's 57 out of 64 of the most important industries in the world. And even though the way they do it, it's not that healthy in terms of profits because it's basically just the government dictating, saying, what they will do is that they will offer a lot of loans to a large number of companies to develop in an industry until they lead it in the world, right? So
Right.
that's why you see the Chinese stock market has done terribly. But at the same time, they've actually gone and led a number of industries, including like drones, and they're getting close, as you know, on AI and quantum computers and things like this.
Yep.
Um, but how do you see China in AI? Because um, I mean, there was so much talk about DeepSeek. I don't know a ton of people actually using DeepSeek, and myself, I'm back to OpenAI products
Right.
as my favorites. Um, but maybe it's because I'm not nerdy enough and kind of happy with OpenAI. I don't know if
Right.
that's the issue. But what are your thoughts as an expert?
Yeah. So there's several layers to this. So number one, yes, like China produces more scientific papers on AI, and I talked to some of my friends in other sciences, and they say, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming out of China. You know, at the same time, America still has double or triple the number of game changing papers and game changing patents than China does. And also, even if you have AI, even if China hypothetically achieves AGI or ASI before us, which probably will not happen, they have literally a tenth of the data centers that we do, and they have no hyperscale, or they have like one hyperscaler, whereas most of the hyperscalers in the world are American. So, in terms of expertise, as far as I'm concerned, China has already lost the AI war. If they catch up on chips, which they're way behind on chips, even if they catch up on AI, it doesn't matter. We outweigh them in terms of just raw compute capacity 10 to 1. And as far as I know, that gulf is widening because China just does not have the expertise or the willpower to do it. So when you look at the fundamentals in terms of, if you say AI is going to be the thing driving, the economy of the future, we just outpace them. It's that simple. Now, have they made strides? Absolutely. Are they going to continue making strides? Sure. Anything. But the Chinese chips actually remind me of when America was competing with the MiG 29. So we developed the F-16. It was a new fighter jet that was designed to be the ultimate dogfighter in the world. It's still the best dogfighting jet. And when and the reason that we designed it so well is because we thought that the MiG 29 was going to be this spectacular thing, but it turned out to be a bulky, slow, inefficient, like underdeveloped jet fighter. And so we're like, wow, okay. Now with AI and chips, everything's a lot more transparent. But the way that the Chinese approach innovation is very, very similar to the way that Soviet Russia approached innovation, which was usually imitation and cutting corners and like kind of pretending to be better than they are. So I'm not convinced that China has the culture, the innovation culture. Like, I'm not talking about like criticizing Chinese culture as a whole. I don't think they have the innovation culture or the political culture to really innovate at that level. And they certainly don't have the technical expertise right now. So they'd have a lot of catching up to do. But what they're staring down the double barrel shotgun of a demographic crisis, of a debt crisis, and a water crisis. They're actually staring down three crises that they have 5 to 10 years to try and solve, and they're not going to solve all three of those crises in one go, whether or not they have artificial intelligence in the data center. So, in the long run, I think it's no contest. Personally, I could be wrong, but I just don't see the fundamentals there.
And what about robots? I mean, my own thinking is I think the US will remain number one when it comes to AI. Um, but in terms of production capacity and robots, I'm kind of seeing China as the winner.
China will churn out more robots, but it's going to be the same made in China problem that we've seen the last couple of decades, which is they're not going to be as good. They're going to be more fragile. They're not going to be as intelligent. In terms of vertical integration of cognitive architectures and the underlying artificial intelligence and the chips, America is already way out in the lead. Certainly, Unitree and what's the other one? It starts with a B. China does have a couple of companies that have clearly built the platform, but they are not. When they do the demonstrations, they're like basically kind of like dancing on their own. They're not doing anything useful. Whereas American robots and Japanese robots, the Toyota one is pretty good. But American robots are actually being deployed in BMW plants. They're being deployed in Amazon warehouses. They're actually doing stuff in chaotic environments. I have not heard of any Chinese robots doing that. They're basically just animatronics at this point. So it's not just the hardware. It's the software and the integration as well that you really have to look at. Will they produce more than us? Probably. But they're going to basically be like the battle droids from Star Wars, like, pretty minimally useful, not very intelligent, pretty fragile. That's kind of the model that I kind of see emerging.
Do you think to some extent that there are people talking up China and maybe also Russia, not in terms of technology, but their power in military, to make sure that we're kind of diligent and stay ahead?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's propaganda 101 is you have to have an enemy. You have to have a way of organizing society. And I think the fact that China is not on most terms a completely credible threat is one of the reasons that, like, it's certainly not the threat that the Soviet Union was. Like, it was a black eye to America when they had Sputnik and the first man in space, the first woman in space, and that sort of thing. But America is still resting on its laurels, and that this isn't to say that like America's the best, we're number one at everything. Like, no, we have definitely stagnated, but we were so far ahead that it's going to take a while for Americans to wake up to the geopolitical competition that China represents. Now, with that being said, the State Department, the Pentagon, it has been their official policy since at least 2017, probably before then, but certainly in terms of public-facing policy, that China is the number one adversary, and that's what we're orienting towards. I honestly think that is why we're withdrawing more from Europe, because it's like, hey, Europe, you got to contain Russia. We're going to focus on the Pacific theater, because despite the rhetoric from the government, like, I still think that Europe and Canada and England are like best allies for America, and that when Trump is gone, because he's on his last term, the Constitution has handcuffed him. He's out in 3.5 years. Then things will go back to normal, and so then it's like, okay, Western style liberal democracies. What is our end game there? And the end game is what we're good at: democracy and cooperation. And we will outpace and out innovate our adversaries. And ideally, I don't see any reason that it must come to a shooting war. Just in the same way that the West, NATO and the Western powers, we just outlasted Russia, right, until they just kind of withered on the vine. And I see the same thing happening with China in the long run. It's going to cause heartburn for a while. There's going to be some saber rattling, but in the grand scheme of things, nobody really wants a shooting war between the West and China, or even America and China. It doesn't, even if no allies get involved. Yeah, so we collectively will out innovate them in the long run, and I don't really see any reason not to believe that uh, on multiple dimensions.
Yeah, by the way, I think you're correct in saying that. I mean, the EU and Europe will stay close friends of the US. And I think, I mean, if you look at the media, then the picture is different, right? But if you
Right.
look at the way, like the UK just did the trade deal with the US, it's not a very impressive trade deal, but the rhetoric is here. We're
Right.
the closest friends. I mean, even Macron, I mean, when you have Donald Trump saying they're all kissing my ass, normally you would think that French arrogance would say we're definitely not kissing anything. but
Yeah.
but they are staying pretty quiet, right? They're just
Yeah.
saying, okay, let his do.
Just let it blow over.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even Denmark, where a lot of people here, they were like, Trump is threatening us with a war over Greenland. I'm like, no, he's not. We are still close allies.
Right.
And I think what you're correct in assuming they just want the rest of NATO to invest more and be able to focus more on China and be more ready the day China might try to invade Taiwan, rather than having to focus half the resources on Russia. Because it doesn't
Right.
make sense from a GDP point of view. Russia is slightly bigger than Spain, right? I mean, the EU should be able to manage.
Right. Well, and you look at the cost of, for instance, just bogging Russia down in Ukraine, right? Like Russia has they been able to conquer about 20 to 25% of Ukraine at the expense of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and billions of dollars. So it's like the Western powers, if we cooperate, Russia will not make any progress, in Poland and Finland and everything else. Yeah, and I see that is probably going to wind down. It's interesting. I'm not sure where it will end. I don't know if Putin has a way out safely for himself, because if he fails, then the rest of the Russian apparatus might remove him by force, or at least he will live in shame the rest of his life. But yeah, so I'm not particularly worried about it. It's a lot of noise, and the loss of life is, I think, the worst part, because it's tragic and it's also completely pointless in the grand scheme of things. Russia's not going to, even if they claim more territory, who cares in the grand scheme of things? Like there's no long-term plan or no long-term outcome in which Russia is the big winner here. It's just not going to happen.
No, I agree. I think Trump is probably giving Putin the opportunity to have a solution where he can claim that he's a winner and some of it
Right.
was rightful, so he can hold on to power because of that. So I think the critics, they are saying that if you do that, he will come back for more. And I think other people are saying, no, he will not come back for more because it has been too expensive and it didn't make any sense. But
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I know very clever people, both saying that, you need him to suffer a defeat to stop him, and other people saying the opposite, saying he's too weak. Just give him a decent way out, and the aggressive behavior will stop. So I don't know what's correct. And also
Yeah.
with China, I think it's very interesting. I mean, there's your view and Peter Seihan and also other really intelligent people who say, they are just getting so far ahead in so many industries that, on many parameters, they will be number one in the world. But we'll see. I think it's interesting, slightly scary to follow
Yeah.
some of it. But I think So some people are saying that because of this, kind of Cold War with China on industries like robotics and AI, we might move faster than what is safe. So because we need to win, just like we needed to win back when competing with the Soviet Union, then kind of safety goes a little bit aside. But do you see that? I mean, you used to worry quite a lot about cybersecurity. Do you still worry or not at all?
I mean, certainly there's always new threat vectors, right? There's always, every time there's new technology, there's new threat vectors. But one of the primary things that a lot of the like anti-AI people worried about was like, oh, we're going to, elections, you're not going to be able to trust any elections whatsoever in the future because of AI. And it's like, well, that hasn't materialized, right? Propaganda has not really changed. Sure, there's more AI powered propaganda bots and trolls, but everyone knows that and they get banned from platforms and those sorts of things. So it could be one of those things where you look at the aggregate and you look at tools like Perplexity and ChatGPT, and people have stopped using Google, people talk to the AI, they talk to Grok. So it could be that the net effect is that people are more information literate and more media literate because of AI. So, has AI destroyed democracy? No sign of that yet. If anything, it's gotten a little bit stronger because now the good guys have more tools in their arsenal, law enforcement and intelligence operatives and everything else. Yeah, so I'm not too particularly worried. There was a paper that came out a couple months ago, AI 2027, which was some people charitably said that it was good at starting conversations, but even the authors of that paper, which they proposed a nightmare scenario in which AI could take over the government by 2027, was basically laughed off the internet by people that are more mature, because it's just like, guys, it hasn't even started taking jobs. Like this is a fantasy. And so the conversation, the AI doomer conversation has really quieted down, and it started maturing because, and this happens for all new technologies. There was a whole bunch of movies in the 80s about like genetic engineering where people were turning into like mutants and stuff like that. We always have this like spooked reaction to new technology. And then once we get familiar with it, it's like, it's been a while since we've had a new zombie movie, right? Like nobody is worried about genetic engineering. We're not saying like humans are going to accidentally evolve in green glowing goo anymore. So that's just the natural life cycle. Is we are still fundamentally primates, and new things are spooky. It's that simple. So like I'm not really worried about AI safety. Lots of people are talking about it. Lots of people are working on it. And that's not to be like super flippant or blasé about it, but certainly the worst case scenarios that people have imagined, none of them have materialized. And even some of the middle grade, scenarios like political manipulation, that hasn't even materialized. So, I don't see the evidence for it.
So just circling back and kind of an ending note, is that kind of why you're focusing on post-labor economics? Because that is kind of the real nut that we need to crack?
Yeah, I always focus on what's the biggest problem that I can solve, right? And so at first I got into AI because I was not convinced that alignment was solved. But then, the conversation very quickly shifted to what do we align AI to? And then the conversation shifted again was, what about my job? Right? Like, as people, like you said at the very beginning of the conversation, most people are just focused on like, what is it, don't care about geopolitics. How does it impact me? And so the more I've studied economics and the impact of AI and the history of it, I realize, yeah, this is going to be messy. I do see plenty of solutions, but yeah, to answer your question directly, yeah, I've pivoted to post-labor economics because it's the thing I can't shut up about. It's so interesting to me, and I keep talking about it, and it keeps working. So that's what I'll be doing until I feel like the problem is solved.
I think that's a great idea. Well, thanks anyway for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure once again. And that's it for this episode with David Shapiro on AI. If you haven't already, make sure to check out part 1 of our conversation. It sets the stage for everything we discussed today. And if you've seen that, take a look at some of the other episodes here on the Mindblowers podcast, where we explore the future of AI, robotics, and what's coming next. Also, if you haven't done so already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave me a comment. I'd love to hear who you think I should interview next and what topics you want to hear more about. Stay tuned. I release a brand new podcast every week, all about the ideas that will shape our future.